Let's talk about Laurence Sterne, one of the most unconventional, humorous, and psychologically curious writers of the 18th century. Sterne was Irish-born but spent most of his life in England. He was born in Clonmel in 1713, educated at Cambridge, and later ordained as a clergyman. By 1740, he had a small church living in Yorkshire. But here's the twist, his habits were far from priestly. He was witty, social, and rather fond of the good life, which didn't exactly match the clerical image of the time. Then, everything changed with the publication of Tristram Shandy in 1759. It was a literary explosion, something no one had seen before. The novel was eccentric, fragmented, wildly digressive, and absolutely hilarious. Sterne had found his voice. The success made him famous overnight, but it also exaggerated his worst traits, vanity, flirtation, and a flair for drama. Sterne later toured Europe, wrote a second novel, A Sentimental Journey Through France and Italy in 1768. That title, by the way, is often asked in exam, and then died in London that same year while on publishing business. Now, what makes Sterne so important? His two major novels, Tristram Shandy and A Sentimental Journey, broke every rule of storytelling. Instead of a straightforward plot, he gave readers a patchwork of episodes, digressions, and reflections. Critics say his books are bundles of digressions, and that exact phrase has been asked in exam. His first long work before the novels was a political romance, a sharp satire on the church courts, another must-remember title for exam. Sterne also wrote a series of sermons under the name Mr. Yorick, which later became the name of one of his most beloved characters. To help students remember his works in order, you can use your mnemonic code 9 unknown case of abuses and romance of Tristram Shandy sermons from France and Italy. Now let's dive into the life and opinions of Tristram Shandy, Gentleman Sterne's masterpiece. The novel was published in 9 volumes between 1759 and 1767. It's funny, messy, emotional, and deeply experimental. In fact, Arthur Schopenhauer later called it an immortal romance, and that comment has been asked in exam. So, what's it about? Well, Tristram, the supposed narrator, is trying to tell the story of his own life, but he never manages to get to the point. By volume 3, he still hasn't even been born. And yes, that detail, his delayed birth, is a classic exam question. The plot is so full of interruptions, digressions, and reflections that critics call it a forerunner of the modern stream of consciousness novel. Sterne draws from John Locke's philosophy of the association of ideas. His writing mirrors how the mind jumps from one thought to another. That connection between Sterne and Locke has also been asked in exam. The humor often comes from everyday domestic blunders. Tristram's life, as he explains, is cursed by 4 comical mishaps. First, his very conception is ruined by his mother interrupting his father during the act to ask if he remembered to wind the clock. That clock winding incident has been asked in exam. Second, his nose is crushed by Dr. Slop's forceps at birth. That's another one that examiners love. Third, his name Tristram is chosen by mistake when his parents miscommunicate. Folk etymology links it to sorrow, sealing his fate for misfortune. And fourth, as if that's not enough, a falling window sash causes his accidental circumcision, another infamous moment often asked in exam. The novel's cast is unforgettable. There's Walter Shandy, Tristram's father, rational, verbose, and obsessed with theories, Uncle Toby, gentle and childlike, who recreates battles in his garden, Trim, Toby's loyal servant, and Yorick, the kind-hearted parson who later appears again in A Sentimental Journey. Uncle Toby, by the way, is one of Sterne's most celebrated characters, known for his goodness and humanity, and that's been specifically asked in exam. Beneath all the comedy and chaos, Sterne is doing something profound. He explores how feelings and desires shape our understanding, what we'd now call psychological realism. His novels mix sentiment and humor in ways that foreshadow both romantic introspection and modern narrative technique. Finally, A Sentimental Journey Through France and Italy, published in the year of his death, continues Yorick's adventures, part travelogue, part reflection on human kindness and emotion. It set the tone for an entire genre of sentimental writing that influenced later novelists and essayists. So, in short, Laurence Sterne, born 1713, priest and prankster, author of Tristram, Shandy and A Sentimental Journey, gave us one of the first truly modern novels full of digressions, emotional insight, and sparkling wit. Let's move ahead into the middle of the 18th century, where English fiction really begins to diversify both in tone and in authorship. By this time, novels weren't just moral tales or domestic diaries anymore. They were adventure stories, psychological explorations, and even literary experiments. Let's begin with Tobias Smollett, born in 1721 in Dumbartonshire, Scotland. Smollett trained as a surgeon. In fact, he apprenticed to one and later became a surgeon's mate aboard ship. That detail about his naval service has been asked in exam. Life at sea gave him a front-row view of human eccentricities, and those experiences later turned into some of his most vivid fiction. His very first publication in 1746 was a poem about the Battle of Culloden called The Tears of Scotland, again, a line to remember for exam. After trying his luck in London, he quickly became a professional man of letters, writing everything from journalism to history, including A Complete History of England, which is another exam title. But his real breakthrough came in 1748 with The Adventures of Roderick Random. It's a picaresque novel, meaning it follows a roguish, wandering hero through a string of adventures, not always noble, but always entertaining. The plot isn't tightly structured, but it's full of life, humor, and rough energy. Among the many colorful characters, one stands out, Tom Bowling, the kind-hearted sailor. That name, too, has popped up in exam questions. Smollett later translated Don Quixote into English in 1755, a translation that remained influential for decades. That's another direct exam clue. Overall, Smollett gave English fiction a tougher, more realistic edge, more salt and storm, less drawing room. Now, let's turn to Sarah Fielding, born in 1710. She's often remembered as the younger sister of Henry Fielding. That family link has been asked in exam, but she deserves credit in her own right. Sarah Fielding was among the earliest English novelists and one of the first writers to really explore the inner lives of women and children. Her best-known novel is The Adventures of David Simple, which follows a man in search of true friendship and goodness in a corrupt world. She later published a sequel, David Simple, Volume the Last, in 1753. In 1749, she wrote The Governess, considered one of the first novels written specifically for young girls. She also translated Xenophon's Memoirs of Socrates in 1762, a remarkable feat for a woman scholar of her time. And don't forget The Cry, a new dramatic fable, which she co-authored with her friend Jane Collier in 1754. Sarah Fielding's fiction is moral yet tender. She brought psychological depth to 18th century storytelling. Finally, Charlotte Lennox, born around 1730, takes us into the world of literary parody and proto-feminism. Her most famous work is The Female Quixote from 1752, and yes, that title and year are both regulars in exam. The novel's full title is The Female Quixote, or The Adventures of Arabella, clearly referencing Cervantes's Don Quixote. It's a witty parody of romantic fiction, showing what happens when a young woman reads too many French romances and starts mistaking fiction for real life. Arabella, the heroine, grows up secluded in a castle, absorbing tales of knights, chivalry, and grand passion. When her father insists she marry her cousin Glanville, she imagines herself a romantic heroine beset by trials and gallant suitors. At one point, she even jumps into the Thames to escape a supposed danger, pure comedy. Eventually, a wise doctor convinces her to face reality, and she happily marries Glanville. What's fascinating is how Lennox uses parody to critique the way fiction shapes women's imaginations. Jane Austen later admired the female Quixote and used it as a model for Northanger Abbey, another fact asked in exam. Critics like Scott Paul Gordon have pointed out that Arabella actually wields immense power without even realizing it, an early glimpse of feminist irony in fiction. Lennox also wrote poems on several occasions in 1747. The Life of Harriet Stuart in 1751 and Henrietta in 1758, all expanding the emotional and moral scope of women's fiction. So, if we step back for a moment, Smollett, Sarah Fielding and Charlotte Lennox together show how broad 18th century fiction had become. Smollett gives us rough, picaresque adventure. Sarah Fielding opens the inner world of virtue and emotion, and Charlotte Lennox brings satire and self-awareness. They form the vital bridge from the early moral novel to the psychological and social fiction of Austen's era.